Joining me is my co-host and friend, Donna Hanover of Arts in the City. Theater Talk has been on the air for 26 years in some form, and our first guest ever was the great critic John Simon, and we are so delighted to have him with us this week.
Happy to be here.
And joining John Simon is another critic, Matt Windman, who I first met when he was but a student at NYU. He became a drama critic and a lawyer and has written this wonderful book, The Critics Say, in which he did an extensive interview with how many critics, Matt?
57 critics, I think.
Important one among them was John Simon, and that's what brings him here today. And also joining us is Justin Brown, who is now John Simon's co-host on their TV show on RN, multi-platform show on RNN, yes. Corner Table, which is every Friday. Justin and John, like Siskel and Ebert, reviewing the shows. Welcome to all. John Simon, I'm so happy you're back. You are still a critic. How many years have you been a drama critic?
I don't know. I'm not good at mathematics.
All right. Some years. I met you in 1991, and you'd been doing it quite a while.
Yeah. Look, I'm almost 100 years old, and I almost remember things from maybe 80 or 70, but beyond that, I don't.
But John, back in the day, you were considered to be quite abrasive in some respects. A great writer, but very hard on people.
I think that's putting it a little lightly.
How would you characterize it, Matt?
Many of the critics that I interviewed talked about John. It was almost like a back and forth between them, which is kind of how I wanted the book to feel, where almost like it was this imaginary symposium. Although I had interviewed each critic separately, I structured it in such a way that they're kind of bouncing their feedback back and forth. And a lot of the critics talked about their feelings about John Simon, his legacy, his attitude, and obviously many of them have had different opinions on it. But what I think they did agree on was his fearlessness.
They seem to admire your writing very, very much. They didn't always agree with your assessment, or maybe with how acidic you were. But that brings me to a question. Did you ever consider being such an intellectual and vibrant writer? Did you ever consider being a playwright yourself?
No, I never did. I don't think you should play. I mean, Bernard Shaw was able to do it, but most of us can be satisfied if they can do a decent job on one side of the fence.
Being both a critic and a playwright is also very dangerous because you risk ceding some of your authority if you were to do a show and let's say it's terrible. Like, then how can you go back the next day and maintain that aura of authority?
The thing that's so amazing to me, John, is many people at your age, you know, you have a couple years on me, would just say, I'm retiring, I'm stopping. But not you. You are compelled to write. You obviously love to write. You still do it beautifully.
I know that there are two things that keep me going. One is my column, my blog, and the other is watching tennis, which I enjoyed enormously.
Now, Justin.
Yes.
How did you come into John Simon's life?
Funny enough, we met outside of, I think it was Waitress. This was a couple years ago. And the father was playing across the street. And his wife, Pat, introduced us. And I'd always heard...
Yes, and you were her student, Pat Simon at Marymount, right?
And I had graduated at this point, I believe. And she had introduced me, and I was absolutely fearful. So I was like, is this man going to say something that's going to, like, set me off as like this queer, brown feminist that I am? But what ended up happening was we had a wonderful conversation about the father. And we saw Waitress, and I get a phone call from Pat, and she says, oh, you and John have really good chemistry, and the conversation flowed really naturally, and you weren't scared of him, and he wasn't necessarily intimidated by you. Would you consider maybe doing a little demo for this TV show that they want to do for RNN? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so we saw an off-Broadway production at the Atlantic. I can't remember what it was. And then we sat on a stoop and we talked about it. My hair was purple and curly and I had facial hair. It's been a very blossoming identity alongside John, which is kind of ironic when you know John's history. So it's been an interesting, fun journey.
Now, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, what is my history?
Oh, what I mean by that is I think when you Google John Simon, you end up finding all of these comments about like, oh, John is racist, or he is sexist, or he is misogynist, or he's this and he's that. But what I think is really fascinating, and I think it's a conversation that we've started to have a lot more in the past 2 years or so, is meeting in the middle with people who don't necessarily have the same perspective you have. My philosophy is you gotta find some good in something if somebody made it. But I have a difficult time even thinking about, and I wanted this to be good. I wanted this to be good so bad.
Why?
With John and I, we've had moments, absolutely behind closed doors and off the record, where I've been like, John, you probably shouldn't say that. And he's like, oh, why? And all of a sudden, it's a moment of learning.
I think you say wonderful things, but I don't think you should say with John and I. You should say with John and me.
So John and I...
It's another learning moment for all of us.
I guess so.
Oh, now, hey, you know, last night, it won't be as people are watching this, but as we're taping this, was the Tony Awards.
Yes, it
now, you got me
was.
scared of my grammar, John. Were the Tony Awards, was the Tony Awards. And, of course, the big winner was the band's visit, which is all about meeting in the middle and learning. Did you watch the Tony Awards, John Simon?
Well, perhaps for the first time in my life, I agreed with a lot of things that they were saying.
Yes, remarkable.
I certainly was one of the first person to spot the band's visit as being quite a wonderful show.
And I hated it.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Which felt like an interesting conversation between us. I'm very militant about my approach to certain political topics in theater. And I think what's exciting about the band's visit is the score itself being so diverse and culturally pointed in terms of the music, but I didn't like the way it was put together. I didn't like the construction of it as a musical.
Well, there's no tap numbers, that's for sure.
I know, right? But it's the lyrics were bizarre to me. I had a whole issue with it. But
what would you have voted for?
I probably still would have voted for it.
All right.
You know, except I did find SpongeBob more impressive. But that is a very personal little situation because I think my expectations were very low for SpongeBob, and they were met and beyond.
But many people thought Ethan Slater was going to.
I was convinced he was going to win.
Matt, your thoughts on?
Actually, in terms of Best Actor, I thought it was going to be Joshua Henry.
Me too.
But I did find it interesting that we all assumed that the band's visit was going to win Best Musical. It was really no competition. The band's visit, I think, is exceptionally well put together for what it is, but it doesn't necessarily inspire the same kind of enthusiasm that, say, Dear Evan Hansen or, of course, Hamilton did in recent years.
Nothing's going to inspire that.
Well, yes.
Now, John, you made such an important point in Matt's book about the necessity of having critics. What would happen to the theater were there no professional critics?
Well, Pauline Kael said it right, actually. She said, if there weren't critics, we would depend on press agents.
But in one of the things that's quoted in Matt's book is that you never viewed yourself as being a representative of the consumer. That wasn't your job, to tell somebody what was worth their money to see or something. It was more to have almost a conversation with the theater community.
Well, it's also a conversation with myself, because I'm my own most severe critic, and I don't let anything pass until I have argued it with myself.
Again, we say you're a compulsive writer. You write every
Quickly.
day. When you get up in the morning, do you say, I'm going to go write?
Well, when I get up in the morning, I say, my God, do I have to get dressed again? In the morning, I think about breakfast.
Do you despair the direction the theater's taking now?
I've always despaired about it, but somehow it seems to thrive on my despair.
John, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I think Woody Allen said it best. He said that my criticism is the most likely to survive. I agree with him.
But do you think that your criticism being the most likely to survive is due to the fact that it is so abrasive and people kind of feel like, I can't remember who this quote is from, but they were talking about you and saying many times gave positive reviews, but those positive reviews oftentimes were outweighed by the negativity that you had to say. And so people kind of thrive off of that negativity and work and in remembering the negativity. Do you feel like that's a reason why you'd be remembered as opposed to the way that you write? Because I feel the people in this circle have so much respect for you as a critic because of your prose, not necessarily because of the negative or positive things that you have to say.
No, I think what makes the biggest difference ultimately is your writing. You could be writing about horses or about agriculture. If you write well enough, it becomes interesting.
I agree.
Well, Jesse Green said on this here.
I grew up reading a lot of critics, some of whom wrote loathsome stuff. John Simon is an example. And I would read that stuff, some of it virulently homophobic, and I was a little gay boy, and I still ate it up. I understood where he was coming from, and he was such a good writer.
He is a good writer.
I could put that in a context and learn from him, even though I disagreed with him.
Here you are, you're working with Justin, who's a person of, I don't want to define you, Justin, but you're a very contemporary person now in the way you present, you present yourself. So your views have softened about gender fluidity and states of beauty, have they not?
I was never so antagonistic as people paint me out to be. It's just that people remember something very nasty, or as they see it, nasty, especially if it's witty. I mean, witty always survives, and since it's always something negative, because wit usually doesn't extol, wit usually cavils. So, of course, negative criticism is what remains in people's mind, and they forget about all the other things. If you look at one of my collections, there are a lot of positive reviews in there, but those got forgotten, and the antithetic ones remain. So
there we go.
The other thing I want to remain is that I love women, and I particularly love beautiful women. And I'm very happy that there's someone called Katrina
Katrina Lank.
In the book, when you spoke to me, didn't you say that, and you talked about the importance of how you feel looking at beautiful women. Did you say that, I think you said that in a sense you kind of fall in love with them? Maybe so.
Matt Windman, the critics say, Justin Brown, Corner Table, Fridays on RNN. A wonderful show with you and John Simon, telling it like it is. John Simon, the great critic, thank you so much for gracing our show once again.
My pleasure.
And Donna Hanover, it has been such a pleasure having you as a co-host. Donna Hanover, who's a correspondent, and I also want to say, viewers, a feminist hero.
Yes, she
Look it up. And so,
thank you, my dear.
It's wonderful, darling. Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the CORY and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy STRELSIN Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you